Yeah, they've improved that. Zoom is a nice tool. Okay. So let's throw up an agenda for today. Share. So optional type specifier for sure. Okay, so I think most important is maybe if to coordinate what we are working on. So I don't know. We haven't talked to Brian for a while, so maybe one thing we could discuss is the final update on the STU common split.
Oh, good, yeah.
And that would include us now. Well, that will probably bring us to the 1.x, 2.x discussion. Then let's see, 2.x work items, 1.x work items, maybe. That's part of it. Sure. Current activities. Okay. We keep it like a stand-up, so we'll just focus on what we're working on and what we're going to work on. So let's start with this STU common split. We've done that, I think, just before the summer holidays for us. After we finished, did the split, after we published 1.3 of the API. And well, it's been discussed for a while, of course. I think for me, it means we have 2 repos now, and we work from we still ourselves work from GitHub FHIR API, but it has a sub module in GitHub FHIR Common. So I don't no longer have to worry that I port every single change I'm making forward, which is nice. And
so what does it mean with the unit tests, the likes of the serialization one that uses the summary provider?
So tests that have specific references to STU materials.
Yep.
That one.
Yeah, and so or use the POCOs most of the time. They have remained in the non-common parts. So which is actually pretty fine, because if I work, I open the normal FHIR solution, which opens both the main repo and the common repo. So if I run the tests, I run both the tests that are in common, and I run the tests that are for a specific STU. So really, what I still need to do, obviously, is if I make tests in common and I need to test it in 2, 3, and 4, we still run all the unit tests for this specific stuff. And so that also means that Marco has split up some unit tests that, for example, the FHIR path was tested with these test all tests from specification or something like this, right? This test file made by HL7 itself. They only maintain that for R4, so we have these tests only in R4. And one of the things, let me see if I can show that. What we did, sort of like a naming convention, but I don't know if we did that everywhere already. I'll move this out of the way. Let me minimize this a bit. Can you? This bothers me. Well. Common. So in the solution, if we look at the tests, there's tests in common, and there are tests outside of common. And most of the time, these tests, So here's these Marco's created specifically. These are the FHIR path R4 tests which use POCOs, and so specification test obviously is we still have one version per but it means that the tests that are in so serialization is still it looks like they're all still here, which what we haven't done everywhere is that, and that's a process. When I encounter them, I still do them. There's still things we can move from the non-common parts to the common parts. So sometimes I'm encountering a test and I'm like, there's nothing specific in here, so I can move it to the common tests. And there's a lot of that still here in the code base. For example, in FHIR core, there is these REST things called content type.cs, for example. There's nothing version specific in this.
Except the DST2.
Yeah, well, there's almost always a but.
Yeah.
But so far, I've managed to dance around it by sometimes introducing, instead of referring to resource, I refer to I do a generic, or sometimes I just I massage it a bit, or I keep a little bit behind. Something stays behind. Or I do it as an extension method instead of on a POCO, and there's all kinds of tricks I found I could do to still be able to move them. But you're right, Brian. Sometimes you're 90% done, and then you encounter that, oh crap, there's just this one little bit that makes it really hard to move it. And obviously it would get much easier if we managed to move resource out to common. There's a lot of things we could do as extension methods on resource, or move over once resource would not be part of the POCO specific code anymore. But before,
so actually, can we throw two things on the agenda so I don't forget, please?
Yeah.
Can we throw on the end there and then he forgets straight away.
Before you forget, oh, too late.
Already gone.
We were talking about moving resource to common.
Forks. So what we're doing with forks, and the other one was it will come back to me.
Okay.
Okay. So the remained in the custom.
Async, the async client.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, the HTTP client, the stuff that I think it was George was looking into.
Yep. Specific.
That's the one I was thinking of. Yeah.
So there's still quite a bit of code in the STU specific bits. It's that can be moved, but this is well, this is ongoing work, I guess. Even more could be moved when we manage to get a resource into common. Now, also, well, that's part of the 1.x, 2.x discussion. So straight after we split off common, we started working on some breaking changes, because there's we've saved up and patched up quite a few things that we want to do that would break the API, not majorly, but still in some ways. So we started working on what we now call 2.x, 2.0, and so develop STU3 and develop R4 are now contain work that will be released as 2.0.
And will contain breaking changes.
And will contain breaking changes. And also, because they are breaking changes, ooh, that's us. Let's see, on the GitHub page for the project. Let's see, I added a wiki page with breaking changes in 2.0. And so far I have documented here what I've done. Now we'll paste that in the notes. Where are the notes? Yeah. These breaking changes are documented here. And now I really want to get rid of this. Can you actually see what I'm pointing at? No, probably not. It's just something I can see here.
I see just the notepad.
Yeah, that's. There was a little window from Zoom was stuck on top of my notepad and was right in the way.
Wow.
Because I can type blindly, it didn't really matter, but so this is better for me. So these are the breaking changes. And so for 2.0, most of the work, the 2.0 work items, so that's where we're getting here. For now, these is FHIR path normative. And yet, contrary to what HL7 says, normative is breaking. So I had to do this in 2.0 anyway. And so for 2.0, currently work on FHIR path normative. And this also includes changes to the primitives, the type systems in because they added I had to add a partial date, I think, for example. We now have partial date, partial time, partial date time, but also way better separation between FHIR and FHIR path and the mapping language. It turned out that we have all kinds of assumptions that we are working with FHIR, which in FHIR path is already not true because FHIR path is used for CQL as well. But also in the mapping language, there's these assumptions everywhere. And the problem with the mapping language is, and the mapping language pushes that, is that you can use it to map V2 to CDA or CDA to FHIR. And then you discover that in many places in our API, we're actually silently and implicitly, depending on the fact that we're using FHIR somewhere, but it's not always true. So I've started to work on that. And that mainly means that I'm making a difference between FHIR.string, for example, and system.string.
Universal.
Yeah, which is a universal, which I'm starting to call a universal type. But the spec calls this system.string. You can see in the documentation, specifically the FHIR path documentation, that also Bryn and Graham now slowly realize that, and especially Graham, that this and system.string is not the same thing. We've been treating them the same, but system.string is actually a low-level string like this one. Ha. Well, FHIR string still has extensions and IDs and all that other crap. So system.string is the real primitive, and FHIR.string is built up from, amongst other things, system.string. Now that separation wasn't always clear, and we've thoroughly confused that everywhere in our FHIR.net API stack. Which was fine so far, but the mapping language is, it hurts in the mapping language, and it starts hurting if you really want to make FHIR path independent of FHIR and work well with CQL and other things.
Does that mean FHIR.string is still implicitly, you don't need to go .value?
Yes, right. You could say that FHIR.string .value would lead you here. It doesn't exist in FHIR path, just to be sure, huh?
Yeah,
but Ray, for example, silently introduced it in the mapping language. He would say destination patient dot or say source path dot name dot value, and then he means actually reach out to system.string, and then maps to destination path.name.value, whatever, because he needed to specify that he was really dealing with these low level. And then I guess for us, we started to realize that we need to treat these things separately. Also, in FHIR we do stuff like this: patient.name.given is evaluator. And then if I look at my FHIR code, I'm silently actually promoting this to, or demoting this, I don't know, actually, to a system.string before I can compare the two. But it was all, I did this implicitly. I never thought about this.
Should it actually called be given.value then? That would be more correct, or?
Except that we never chose to do it because the value attribute only exists in XML.
Okay, yeah.
So for JSON people, that wouldn't make sense.
Okay.
And this issue surfaced again when we were talking about some of the existing mapping files where things like this happen. Patient.active is true. Now you want this to work, but this is an assignment from a system Boolean to a FHIR Boolean, and the spec never describes how these casts work. So we have to be way more explicit about it. So now I'm doing 2.0 for FHIR normative. I've also started on the work to make this more explicit. Then that leads to a few changes that I've documented here so far. Although it seems to be quite a list, I think most people won't be hurt by it, but the group on this call will be hurt by it, of course, because we use I-typed element pretty deeply. And maybe if you've ever used stuff like type info, but it's not a big group that's gonna be hurt by these changes. You will probably, for example, there are still upcoming changes, Brian, I think, for how we deal with the symbol table. And since you manipulate simple tables, you probably see these changes. Anyway, it's going to be questionable. Yeah, it's going to affect you, but it's going to be questionable whether I can finish this work before my sabbatical, which is now in 5 weeks.
And counting.
And counting. So what I'm trying to get ready before I leave, because I don't want to leave FHIR engine with the hood open, so to say, with all the motor parts outside. I'm putting the parts back in, so at least it will run most of the tests from those HL7 test files. But I won't have gone all the way splitting up system string and FHIR.string, and I have to write a very smart casting system because they have introduced all kinds of casts in the new normative FHIR that I hadn't seen about. For example, date and date time need to be able. Date can be implicitly casted to datetime, which makes sense, but it's another cast. And I can see from the tests, and I don't even know whether they did this explicitly.
There's a zoning. If you cast it to a date time, it's a partial date time without the time part.
Yeah.
Well, that's what it's going to.
Yeah. Well, so the spec is. The spec, I think, now has actually a section on all this casting, and let me just say they have elaborated on the casting. So far, okay. I've been hacking the casting, but now I can't do it anymore. I really need a casting system in the FHIR engine. Well, it's unlikely I'm going to make that work before I leave. So I will just make sure that it runs. It applies. It can run as many as possible of the tests that are in the FHIR normative test file, and then we have to decide a little bit on whether we actually push it. I mean, if we publish 2.0 1 week before I go, and there's bugs in it, who's going to fix them?
Yeah. Then I also go on sabbatical, I think.
Yeah. And if we just park that work and say, well, we'll wait until I'm back, is that fine? I mean, it's not like many people are asking for normative.
Well, I guess that's a part of it, and we sort of want to have it to get as much exposure as we can before we actually push it out. If you've got it to an alpha stage at that point, I can probably start putting it in, running it through our internal testing stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, and then we have to make sure, because this is a 2.0, that probably after I return and I'll fix up the automatic casts, that we might break a few more in interfaces here and there. But we could try that. We could try to push it to low alpha, so at least people can try it.
Yeah, I think, especially if you're heading away for that significant period of time, pushing a non-alpha in that sort of space wouldn't be a good idea.
No, I agree.
So if you put it in an alpha, then we are still give us the liberty to still change the definitions, right? So so a beta comes then, okay, because we don't want to stress our users too much. With every release, you have to change. Yeah, again, exactly. Yeah.
Because I should be doing a bucket load of stuff with questionnaires and FHIR.
Yeah.
So it should get a reasonable amount in the custom.
That's true.
It'll have a decent exercise once I get up there.
Okay. Well, alpha sounds good for me, I think.
Yeah, and it's well, I mean, at least Brian and probably let's see, Marco, you have seen some of the code, and it hasn't changed in any major way. Because I do want to, but that's really something I'm only going to do when I come back, is unify the mapping engine and FHIR.
Yeah.
Because now we have two code generation steps. The mapping engine has its own code generator, and FHIR has its own code generator. And the mapping engine code generator is actually an evolution of the FHIR code generator, and I'd love to move that over.
That's all Lambda stuff. It's not actual LGEN, right?
Right, and the mapping engine that we did does LGEN.
Because that's not going to work in any UWP store stuff.
Well, it uses I don't know how they do that. It uses linked.expression.
Yeah. Because if it's using the Lambda stuff, that's okay. But that IL.emit, that's a no.
And so is that also true for linked.expression?
I think that's okay, but I'm not 100% sure.
No, because I'm not doing my own gen. I'm writing link expressions, but link expression at some point you call compile. So they must be turning it into IL.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
But that would be if you run. Oh yeah, of course. And the app you have created runs FHIR as a client, right?
Yeah. That's in the store now. Yay!
Yay! Yeah. So that was actually that would be some kind of to do. Does link.expression, and then especially it's about the lambda expression.compile work under how do you call it? NWP? No, that's not it. Right?
UWP.
Unified WP.
Yep.
Sorry?
Nothing.
Universal Windows. Well, that's what you use if you create store apps.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
That's what I know it does. Yeah. And the same is, by the way, true for if you run the library on a Mac OS.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, so I've got the build that's in the store is the public libraries built locally with one change to change that flag from being a code gen to being a code.
Right. Yeah, but that was really ILGEN, that bit.
Yeah, totally.
And so I don't know what they're doing, because if they, I think they made this work on the UWP. Otherwise, you could never have used link. Right, because this, you use wheres under UWP, and that stuff is compiled with lambda expressions.compile too. So I'm not too fussed about that. But let's see. That is something that is interesting to try. So that is 2.0. So 2.0 work items. For now, this was normative, but there is more breaking changes, and I think, Marco, is that we have more or less decided to break this work into several major releases. So Marco is going to split up the validator in a big refactor, which is probably also going to cause, although not even really big, but again, small changes.
Well, it's actually an addition. It replaces the old validator a bit. So at the point we can still use the old validator and add the code to the new validator. But yeah, at one point it will change and break the code probably.
Yeah. So. And the strategy we did with building this POCO layer, the POCO parsers still exist, although they do nothing more than just call to the I-typed element parsers.
Yes.
That's the kind of tricks we can do for the validator too. So
absolutely.
Yeah. That's
which reminds me of that concurrency issue with the validator that I had.
Yeah, I was pretty sure that we had a lock around it, but we have a lock around something comparable, which is where we generate a snapshot. But I see that we don't do it when we compile the FHIR path. Yeah, I've marked it as a bug and enhancement in the FHIRnet API. So.
Yep. Yeah. So to work around that, I've just in my structure definition resolver, I actually, as it grabs it, which is protected by a lock, trawl through all of the expressions, find the ones that need it, and compile it and shove it in.
Oh, right. You do it all before.
Yeah. Yep. So I prepare those. It's the only one it needed, and it's been running nicely since. But the validator is still the heaviest bit of load on my server.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
That is it is a heavy piece of software, and so in FHIR we actually run it on workers instead of on the HTTP threads. Yeah. Well, and all this stuff. All this 2.x and 3.x is going to take a while, so we realized that for bug fixes we still need a 1.x stream. So there is still a set of branches now for doing bug fixes, and they are all behind the, let me say, 1.x. So we have 1.x DSTU2, 1.x STU3, and 1.x R4.
So that's not got the common stuff in it. That's just the.
Yes.
Well, it does.
So that's exactly what we had with it does.
No, we split it up after having the common, because that makes it way more easier to merge changes.
Okay, cool.
Next forward.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was on purpose.
Yep. Okay, which brings. Yeah.
After the split to easily merge changes from 1.x to 2.x.
Now that you've said that, what does that mean for people who have got forks on?
Mm-hmm. I have no idea, to be honest. What happens with the fork? I think, well, what happens probably is that in their fork, and if they update their fork, they get the .git modules file, I guess. And so the next time, and then if you open up that submodule, then it would expand the new common stuff inside your project, because that's how the submodules work. But if in your fork also included changes on the what we now call the common stuff.
Michel has a fork, right, on the API?
Yes, Michel has a fork.
We didn't hear anything about that. I had other problems, but not these fork problems.
I think that is because all Michel's changes in his forks are on the non-common side. And if you're on the non-common side,
that's true.
And I think that is true for a lot of people. Actually, it's not that the changes are not that big, because your changes in your fork are still on the unchanged files. It's just the files, or these projects rather, these projects that were.
Yeah, so like the support and serialization and stuff like that. If you don't have any changes there, then you'll be on the safe side, right?
You'll be on the safe side. If you have changes, you probably get conflict, because we moved all those projects away to a different subdirectory called common.
Mm-hmm.
So you'll probably have merge problems when that happens.
Okay.
Let's see, here's source. Oh no, see, so common is now on the same level as source, and all the common projects are in here.
Okay.
But otherwise, I think like if you're like Michel and only have changes in the POCO stuff, which is still most of the older code, then actually it for Michel it went pretty well. The biggest step, of course, is knowing how to use submodules, which is a learning curve.
Yes, it is. We noticed it already.
Is there some good links you could send?
Yes, actually, the links I use to learn a little bit about submodules.
Yeah. You don't have to do it now, but that would be great.
Yeah.
Some Valium prescriptions. Yeah, it's okay.
The FHIR does not have substantive changes on code that we now moved to common. You'll just get a new sub.
What you have to understand is that common is actually just a repository inside your repository.
Yeah.
So
it's just
you have
pointed to it, isn't it?
Yeah, but you have to update it once in a while. If you change some branches, you have to update that submodule as well. We use, I forgot the name again, Git-Kraken for our Git tool.
Which is not perfect, but
it's not
works.
really perfect, but sometimes it has a bit of delay with updating icons, which come to be diffuse, a bit confusing. But yeah, we tried also other Git clients, and that works as well. So you can just say to the submodule, just update yourself, and then it will update the repositories inside your repository.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Okay.
And the common and the submodule common points to a commit on that repository, something like that. That's what. So I remember it. Or yeah.
Cool. So where are we in terms of putting suggestions to track stuff we could pull out of the common or out of the specific into the common? Do we have a list of that? Because some of the stuff that does the reflection, that stuff, class mapping stuff, could move up.
I've tried it already, Brian. It's in a branch.
Yeah.
It was like almost there, and then crap. And I think Georgia has also tried to do it. But yeah, that is a prime candidate to move, because it should not depend on it. Where did it depend on it though?
When I tried to move the class mapping a while ago.
Yeah.
But our first try, the problem was model info.
Model info, huh?
Yeah, because it used some template bindings or something like that was generated in the model.
Yeah.
I guess maybe just the question of, are we tracking it somewhere, and so we can make sure we don't all do the same thing.
Right, because yeah, the class mapping stuff now has been moved at least twice. And it's still not in there because I didn't finish it, or it's not good enough that I dared pulling it. Let me say it that way.
Yeah.
It would be nice if that work is in one of the branches before I move away. I tried, because I have quite some work in dead branches that I'd like to be in active branches before I go. Otherwise, it will be more than that. Yeah, well, that's a good question. What would be a good process to do this?
We want to just create a single issue in the GitHub and just say candidates for common.
Yeah, or on the wiki, but something like that. Yeah.
Yeah,
Just to have some candidates which are going to move, and somebody is going to do that or something. Just like assign people to do it, or people can assign themselves.
Yeah, it seems to make sense that we make a wiki page with this, and then as we actually do it, we create
issue
tasks for it. Yeah, that's
awesome.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because it would be lovely if we could, you know, it's really the kind of work that's sometimes nice. You have a few hours left on a Friday, like let's move a little bit of code over, because it's not, most of it is not, you know, it doesn't require a lot of energy, and it's really useful for the common code base to grow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Forge tasks, no way. GitHub, yeah.
We should move all our issues over to GitHub.
Oh yeah, over to GeForce. Yeah, let's do that.
Yeah, shoot me now. Yep.
So current activities. Oh yeah, there's one more, and I don't know where. I don't know actually who's going to be 2x or 3x, but let's say we also have another big thing now. We can break stuff, 4.x work items. I don't know if it's 4.x, but let's just call this major work items, major version. So that's the FHIR path normative. We have the split up of the validator, and also the FHIR client refresh that Georgia has been working on.
Yeah, that's the HTTP client. I didn't mean that to be async client. It was the HTTP client. That's the stuff.
Yeah. And of course, now every time we allow ourselves a major version, that allows us to clean up at least some of the old wood that we've still got laying around, that because of, you know, some of these things have been obsoleted for 2 or 3 years. So maybe it's always a good idea just before pushing like a 2.0 or 3.0 or 4.0, just take a look at, hey, is there some obsolete stuff in the API that we can finally clean out? I haven't done
We have a lot of stuff.
iNavigator or the Navigator. This feels a little bit too recent, but maybe we should clean it up at some point.
It's also time for, because we have a lot of methods now called, you know, like obsolete. Is that the time to remove them as well?
Yeah, that's what I'm.
Oh, that's what you meant. Oh, sorry.
That's what I meant. I already did it for when I encountered some of them, like the date functions without time zones.
Because you were, yeah.
Because I was working on the data types, I was like, "Hup, out they go." So I put, for example, here on the breaking changes, partial datetime no longer has a 2 universal time method since there's no reasonable default behavior.
Wow.
Now you have to do 2-day time offset, and then you will need to specify a default offset to use for the conversion. So it's been like this for a while. The other call was already obsoleted, and now I have removed it.
In my fork, I've got somewhere between what it was and what you've got now. I'm still not happy with it, and I'm going to be redoing it again in my server. Still not happy.
And what was that? What we had and what we're doing now, Brian?
So the default behavior that it used to have, then it was changed in, I don't know which one of the 1.x's it was done in. But yeah, I didn't like that going in my server, so I've still got somewhere between the two. And yeah, I'm still not happy, so I'm still trying to work out what I'm changing it to in my server.
Because if the biggest change we had was with the validation, and I think the sloppy validation or the strict validation, but we defaulted to sloppy in the end to bother no one. I think we discussed at one point in the future pulling that up, but I think that is probably the subject of when we review the validator. We're gonna the good thing about the validator as we envision it is that we can more easily enable parts of it. So you can say, the default behavior is to validate maybe only these basic structural validations, and the rest you have to explicitly enable. We weren't able to do that in the 1.x family of version. So in the end we defaulted to, what is it again? Lenient parsing or whatever is the default behavior.
Permissive parsing.
Permissive parsing is the default behavior as far as I know.
Yep.
It breaks too much stuff otherwise.
Yeah.
And I had a short discussion with Graham on that on Zulip, where Graham said, "Oh yeah, from a new version on, this is no longer. Yeah, it was a bug. It's no longer allowed." And I'm saying, yeah, I know it's a bug, but you have to be really careful. If because of a bug you didn't validate something before and now you do, it is actually an improvement. But if people now have thousands and thousands of breaking resources in their database, that is still a problem.
And then they try and read it out and no longer serialized.
Yeah. And so I'm waiting for the validator refactor before I even start thinking about re-enabling those.
Yeah. Cool.
So current activities. Well, there's also recently we've had we've got 3 bugs currently that need a bit of attention, or at least so I get a lot of pushback from stuff that I always took. You know about that, Brian. We took a shortcut for validating slices. Because what we're actually doing is we're just validating a slice, and if it fails on an element that is the discriminator, then we say, oh, okay, but it doesn't match the discriminator, so it's not in this slice anyway. But if it is an error that's not the discriminator, then we say, you failed this slice, and you should have, because the error is not in the discriminator. And it's a dirty trick that worked for 2 years, but we get more and more pushback also from our consultants here that we need better slice validation. So I think for the last few weeks before I'm leaving, I'm gonna, because I got a solution in a dead branch, so I'm gonna try to reintegrate that. So EK will try to reintegrate better.
Doesn't happy turn it into a FHIR path expression to select it?
Well, yeah. The problem is that you have to do that selection not on an instance but on a definition, because to know the fixed code or the value set that you need to at runtime check against to see whether an instance is in a slice, at compile time, so to say, when you're trying to interpret the structure definition, you have to follow the discriminator in the definition, not in the instance. Because if you follow it in the definition through the structure definition, you'll end up in an element definition, and then you can pick up the fixed value or the value set. And then at runtime, when you're really getting an instance, then you run a FHIR path, you extract that value, and then you compare it. You do it that way. But to find out what is actually the value set or the fixed value to validate against, you need to get that from the structure definition. So you need to run FHIR path on structure definition. So something like
producing from the structure definition the FHIR path expression that is the selector for the element you run on.
Yeah, that's the easy bit, because the discriminator is actually, well, you have to, so if the discriminator is, say, identifier or use, there's 2 bits to it. So to say, at compile time, you have to given a structure definition for patient, you have to say given run identifier.use as a FHIR path statement that will return you one of the element definitions inside patient, right? And then you access its depending on what you want to do. You access its fixed value or its value set or whatever. And then at runtime, you indeed you again use the identifier.use, and now it must be that value that you encountered in the definition.
Yeah, but that's the compilation step from that structure definition to the expression that you get the node from. So that becomes your compilation step to produce an expression.
This.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so what I did in this dead branch is write a FHIR path evaluator that actually does this.
Yeah.
Including a resolve and so on. Jumping to another structure definition and all that
That
crap.
sounds like you've done what I expected. Cool.
Yeah, but it's in a dead branch, so it's a waste of bytes currently. It should be. So I will reintegrate that code into our. Well, it needs to go into 1.x.
If you've got it floating around, send us where that branch is. I'm happy to give that a bash.
Yeah.
It means you get to spend more time doing the other stuff.
So that's what I will try to do. I think that George has offered to work on the reported other bugs. Now I will triage them today and see if they're what's going on. But I could certainly need some help there. Marco will continue work redoing the validator.
Yeah.
And that is probably going to be the plans for at least the next weeks. Yeah.
Okay. So what is the current status of the mapping language? And if you don't want to talk about it on this call for miscellaneous reasons, the licensing status of it.
Yeah, so the public status is that we have a customer that wants to try out the first version of it, and so I've implemented the mapping language in as much as that customer needed it. And that's going to go live in October with the first bunch of, no, actually it's being tested right now and will go live then. And we have discussed with that customer too that we will probably, it won't be open source for now, but we will be at some point, probably after Dev Days Amsterdam, publish the mapping engine as binary, so you can at least use it.
Okay. So as a package or something?
Yep, as a package. Yep. So that's all I can share publicly.
Cool, that's all right. That's all right. I knew there was a caveat there, so I'm happy that may or may not change.
Yeah, but it's actually in an operative state now and being tested at a customer. Yeah. So
we could probably have a chat at Atlanta.
Yeah, we will actually. Yeah, we will. And it's a really nice exercise because it points us out, as I already mentioned before, to all the places in the API where we should not be solely depending on the FHIR data model, but we are dependent on the FHIR data model, and that has shaped my thinking a lot. And I already said to Marco and Christian that I will try to document that because as I will go away for the next 4 months, it is interesting to share that knowledge, I think, with a few people, maybe, and also maybe with you, Brian, by the way.
Yeah, cool.
Okay, the last bullet that I have here is the async client. And I will need to run for my batteries for a sec. No, I have a service.
So has anyone else had a try out the FHIR tester from the store?
No, I didn't.
No.
You?
Since I put it there, yeah.
Oh yeah, you put it there, of course. Yeah, sorry. No, I didn't. Not yet. Yeah. I'm really busy with the validator at the moment, so.
Yeah, one of the things I'm going to start doing with it is actually making it a better tool for messing with validation. So it takes a resource, runs the validator, and then allows you to navigate the operation outcome and your resource.
Okay.
So it just becomes a useful tool for messing with stuff.
There was also, but we only have 5 minutes left. There was also this R5 thing. That when people start asking about R5, we were like, we want to have as much as possible in common before we split up for R5. Generally speaking, I think.
Yeah.
And also, maybe I didn't mention that, but I think for the 2.0 version, we want to drop STU2 completely. So we can fix the 1.x version still if there are nasty bugs, but there will never be a 2.0 version for it.
Yeah.
This kind of makes sense because we already said we would drop it and only do bug fixes. But
yeah.
That means also, Brian, that we probably are going to produce a set of common libraries specifically for the STU2. Because otherwise you cannot run 1.x and 2.x in the same app domain, right? You actually pointed it out to that, and that's important for you and it's important for Martijn.
Yeah.
But I don't want to think too much about R5 yet, otherwise my head will spin. Okay, async client. What was it that you wanted to discuss about that?
That was just the status. It was actually the HTTP client. Async was really something that they do with the HTTP client. Was it George? You were having a play with that. You had a branch.
Yeah. So far, what I've done, I've refactored the requester. So before it was using the bundle entry component to create the HTTP request. Now it's independent. It uses two models, entry request and entry component, and we are doing a mapping between the bundle and these two models. So the requester is in common. And actually we are using the I-type element only for the response.
Yeah. But in general, you want to split up the low-level HTTP stuff, and now you are rewriting the unit tests, so you can test them without actually doing any low-level HTTP calls yet, right?
Yeah.
And you have a bunch of integration HTTP tests that you want to be able to run on a local Vonk server.
Yeah, I've tested the between layers, and now I'm planning to test the HTTP requests.
Okay, cool.
As for the async part, I was not sure, and from our discussions, we were not sure if this is going to be 1.x or 2.x. So
I think that could be 3.x, to be quite honest.
Yeah.
So for what I did so far, I tried to not break too many things, and I split the FHIR client interface. I created another interface which contains only the async operations. Yeah. So if we decided this is gonna be a major release, then I'm just gonna remove everything that is not sync.
Right. Yeah, because we still have to decide them. I think we said so we could have this client next to the existing clients, of course.
Yeah.
So they can still use the old code, and then we can be, because I do know if we do a major release, we could break everything, but that doesn't mean that it makes our users happy. So I'm still very careful about not breaking things that we don't need to break, right?
Yeah.
No one likes to redo all his unit tests. Basically, if I have to do too many unit tests, that tells me that a lot of clients will need to redo a lot of code in their stuff too.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah. So for
That's
now,
all I had. Yeah.
Good. Well, it was still a lot of information again. So, but it's time to go.
Mm-hmm.
And we will probably speak live in Atlanta anyway, Brian.
Yeah, only 2 weeks away.
Only 2 weeks away, I know.
All right.
Okay. Good luck and speak to you later.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Cheers, everyone. Bye.
Yeah, cheers.